lot of feedback from people that change causes a lot of stress for them at work. And finally, I want to just touch on how, as women, as female leaders, I think we have some real strengths that we can leverage to be really effective change leaders. So the agenda today is a little bit about me. I just want to make the link between managing change and happiness at work. Some of you attended the first webinar of the series around change and I'm sorry, about happiness at work. And I just want to make a link for you. And then I want to talk to you about some change capability building that I did as part of a large change that I worked on with the BBC worldwide. And I specifically want to talk about 4 key change leadership behaviors. They're called attractor, edge intention, containment, and creating movement. And I'll share more about what that means and how we did that at the BBC worldwide. And then I just want to touch briefly upon this notion of managing change using a masterful change approach. And at the heart of that approach is really this philosophy that we trust our people, that they really know what the solutions are. And throughout, I'm going to be making some links to what I think are some feminine strengths and how we can leverage those strengths to support the change initiatives that we have going on in our organizations or with our client organizations. So a little bit about me. Jupiter Consulting Group is a firm that I helped to launch 10 years ago, so in 2004. And our tagline is adding life back into work, and we do that by helping organizations manage change differently, and we do coaching, but it's strengths-based coaching, and we also do leadership development focused on authentic leaders. As Rebecca has already mentioned, I've been involved with the PWN organization for 8 years, first as the City Network President in London and then on the board. And for 2 years and a bit, I was back internally working with the BBC Worldwide, which is the commercial division of the BBC, working on helping to land a pretty large-scale change that involved looking at culture, people, processes, systems, values, pretty much everything. And I'll talk a little bit about what my role was. But in summary, I've got over 30 years experience doing change management in one shape or form. The picture on the top is a picture of Dorset. That's my village. I now live in a beautiful village outside of London. And then the picture to the right is my one and only child. She's a furry child named Holly, and she's a Staffy mix. I was going to put my partner's picture up there, but he'd like to remain anonymous. So that's just a little bit about me, just to give you some context. I want to talk a little bit about how change and happiness at work are linked. What's the link here? So we talked a little bit about those of you who were on the webinar about happiness at work. We talked about mental models and the idea that basically we can shape the world by looking at the way we think. And so I think for a lot of us, the mental model that we have around change is that it's really hard work. It's like pushing this stone, this huge rock up a hill. And anytime you get some leverage, that rock sort of slips down, and the change is hard to sustain, and that people resist it. And so I would say that if that's the mental model that we have around change, that a lot of us are either not going to want to get involved with change or going to get involved with change reluctantly. So I'd like to shift your mental models when it comes to change, and I'd like to shift your model so that you're thinking about it more as a process, not as an event. And those of us who are involved in change know this to be true. It never ends. We never get to the end of the change. It's a journey that we take. It's a process that we go on. And I think as human beings, we're actually really good at change. I think we go in that process of change every day. And so every day we're changing. Our cells are changing and renewing. We're getting new blood cells. We're getting new colon cells. We're getting new brain cells even. And so as humans, we are actually pretty good change machines. We do it every day. And in fact, the research shows, and depending on what story you read, that every 7 to 10 years we become a new person, because literally the cells in our body have changed. So I think that the mental model I'd like you to hold on to, at least for the next 30 to 45 minutes, is that change can be easy. Change is an organic process that we actually go through every day. And it's something we can be good at. It's something that can be easy. So hang on to that, because I think if we approach change with that mental model, we're more likely to have happiness at work. Change isn't going to stress us out as much. And in fact, we can look forward to change and embrace change. So hang on to that mental model, and let's just see how that serves us throughout the rest of the webinar. What I want to share with you now is a framework that we used at the BBC Worldwide to help us manage the large-scale changes that we were putting into place. So we started with a vision and a strategy, and I think everyone on the call is familiar with those concepts. The vision is the distinctive, compelling picture of the future state. The strategy is how we're going to get there, and that's pretty typical of any change program. You start with those two things. I think what was different about how we viewed the change and managed the change at the BBC Worldwide was we then looked at, okay, what are the various levers that we're going to need to pull in order to get there? And we looked at the organizational structure and jobs and role profiles and governance, etc., which is the typical thing you think of when you think of organization redesign. And we looked at processes and systems. And of course, we looked at the people, how many we had, where they were located, what kind of capabilities they had, and what kind of new capabilities we would need in order to reach the vision. And we looked at communication and engagement, of course. But at the heart of it all, we really focused on the culture. So what were the mental models or mindsets that people brought? What were the behaviors that we needed them to exhibit? What were the values that we held near and dear, and how those values might need to be refreshed in order to reach our targeted end state? So hold on to this visual in terms of this framework, because I'm going to come back to it later and talk to you a little bit about how we used the framework to build capability. Because we got the senior leadership team and the leadership group of 130 people to get involved in each of these, with each of these boxes. So it wasn't just the communication and HR team, running the communication and engagement box, and it wasn't just the talent management group and the recruiters running the people box. We basically came to it, as I mentioned earlier, with this philosophy that masterful change must be done by the people, and the people actually involved know the answers. So I'll come back to this framework in a minute. Just want to stop for a minute and ask if there are any questions about anything I've talked about so far, the mental models, the frameworks, my view on how change can be easy. I'll just take a deep breath and see if there are any questions.
Hi Michelle, it's Rebecca. I'm just checking on the chat box and there doesn't seem to be any questions from anybody who's written in yet. If anybody's on the call and they want to ask a question at this point, they just need to press *6 on their keypad to unmute themselves.
So I see there's one question, Rebecca, coming into the box, and the question was how many cultures were involved? So, Karen, I assume you're asking what kind of different national cultures. We had, of course, BBC, in London is the heart of everything, but we had divisions in Latin America, North America, New York, in Asia, in Hong Kong, in Singapore, and in, did I say Latin America already? So 5 or 6 large groupings of people. Also Australia, I forgot about Australia. But I think more important than the national cultures is we had very deeply embedded cultures around divisions. People who worked in the branding team were very much, there was a culture around brands. There was a very strong culture in the sales group. There was also a very strong culture in the finance and also in the legal group. So we had national cultures across the world, really. It was global. And then we had our cultures within our industries and within our functions. Okay, I'm going to keep going if there are any other questions, if people can type them in. And we'll keep going and talking about change capability building. So what we used at the BBC was a model that came from a book called Sustaining Change by Deborah Rowland and Malcolm Higgs that basically looked at successful change and identified what was the difference between success and failure. And in summary, they found out that it was leadership. It didn't matter how well or poorly the change was planned. It didn't matter what type of change it was. It didn't matter what kind of change project management software was being used. It really boiled down to leadership. And it boiled down to 4 leadership practices. So the first practice they called attractor, and I'll say more about this in a minute. The second practice was called edge intention. The third practice was called container. And the fourth practice was called transforming space. So what do these change capabilities really mean? So attractor is really about storytelling skills. It's really about attracting people to come on a journey with you. It's capturing hearts and minds. Edge intention is really about turning up the heat. It's telling it like it is. It's being honest and direct without freaking people out. Container is really about anxiety management. Yeah? So making sure that the employees aren't going into fight or flight mode. And finally, transforming space is about coaching in the moment so that you transform people's either mental space, their paradigms and beliefs, and it's also about transforming physical space. So I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. So really with the attractor, it's magnetic energy to create that pull towards that vision. Yeah? Instead of pushing people, it's really creating a magnetic pull. The edge intention is really about finding disturbances within the organization, within the system, and really amplifying them, because people can say, well, things are pretty good here. Yeah, there's 1 or 2 things that could be better. And it's really taking those 1 or 2 things that could be better and really amplifying them so that the organization understands that there's a need for movement and change. Container is really about putting structure in place to manage anxiety, to take all that nervous energy and to contain it and to use it, in other words, to propel people forward using their own energy. And transforming space is really about creating movement. And how you do that is by making sure there's enough time and space for people to have what we call transforming encounters. So a little bit about telling compelling stories. So this is really the ability to tune into the day-to-day reality, see patterns, and connect them into some kind of a wider context, and then to create a story for the organization to really set the context for why things need to change. One of the things I believe is that empathic leaders are able to really, tap into where people are, understand their motivations. And for me, that's really what good storytelling is about, understanding what will hook your listener or your reader. And I think that women have a really long history of storytelling in many cultures, as you can see on the screen. Women are by nature great storytellers, and I think they've been responsible for passing down from generation to generation, the stories that go about preserving their cultures. And so I think this is a real strength that we have as women, and one that we can leverage as change leaders. So how did the BBC do this? How did the BBC tell a really compelling story to get everyone on the same page, understanding the context, understanding the reason for needing to change? Well, what we did is we created a learning map, and you're seeing a picture of it on this slide. It's in black and white, and the actual learning map was very, very colorful, so apologies, I could only find a black and white copy. But what we did is we literally put on one page, and this was rather a large page. It sort of covered, 4 tabletops. We put onto paper the journey, starting with the lower right-hand side, where we really tap into the legacy that that the BBC provides, the BBC being our parent company. Really taps into why we're here, the bigger why. Some of you may have read Simon Sinek's book, Why. Why are we here, and what are we doing? Well, we're here to inform, educate, and entertain. And then looking at our core brands and our core values, so providing the bigger picture and context around what's not going to change, but then looking at what is going to change. So looking at some new organizational capabilities. There are a few of them dotted around the map. So you might see there's a little boat in the right-hand side corner that says trade-off ability. That was a new capability we wanted people to understand and start monitoring and tracking. At the top of the map, relationship building and market understanding. Somewhere there's a little speedboat. I'm looking for the speedboat. I've lost him. Oh, he's also at the top. Speed, doing things quickly. So basically this map was a tool that every single manager could use to bring to his or her team to explain the story of why BBC Worldwide needed to change. I'm just going to stop for a brief minute, take a breath, and ask if there are any questions about creating a compelling story. Okay, I'll keep going. So the next capability was around amplifying the disturbance in the system, really challenging existing paradigms, telling it like it is, describing reality with respect, but without compromising, without making it too soft so we don't freak people out. It's really about spotting and challenging assumptions, and to be honest, it's about creating discomfort by challenging the current, beliefs and paradigms. So you'll notice that I have a couple of pictures on the screen of women, courageous women, who were willing to tell it like it is. And I believe that women have a very unique leadership strength around telling it like it is. The research that I've done shows that women have something called the motherhood gene. And this motherhood gene causes women to rise up and defend others who are in weak positions. So in the corporate world, it's about women who are really speaking up when they see that employees are being mistreated, or if shareholders are being cheated, if customers are being bamboozled. They really have a strong desire to do the right thing. And so I think during times of change that women can really find a way to tell it like it is. They're very keen to treat their staff like adults, not children, even if this means, telling the truth. And my experience is that women really tend to be those watchdogs who call out bad behavior, or not even bad behavior, but behavior that needs to change. And I think this is a real, I think this is a real strength that they have when it comes to being good change agents. So how did we do that in the BBC worldwide? Well, we went around and we taught the managers how to run focus groups. They volunteered, one person per each division, to run a series of focus groups with their people, and they did the following exercise. They asked their teams to describe the BBC Worldwide as an organization and how it looked, or how it felt 2 years ago, how it looked and felt today, and how they'd like it to look and feel in 2 years' time. And as you can see, this data, by the way, was presented to the senior leadership team, who were the ones who kind of needed to hear the truth, because they thought it was a brilliant place. And in many ways, it was. You can see there are a lot of brilliant words there: collaborative, friendly, creative, pleasant atmosphere. But there were also a lot of words like complex, bureaucratic, siloed, process-oriented, overextended, hierarchical. So this was one of the ways that we gathered data and reflected it back up to the leaders so that we could really tell it like it was. The other thing that we did is we asked people to take a look at the BBC Worldwide values, and they're up at the screen, and then we asked them to tell us whether the leaders were living and breathing those values. And we asked them to tell us by drawing some pictures. So the first picture that you see was a picture describing how the leaders in the Miami BBC Worldwide division were viewed. And you can see there's a picture there of Fidel Castro. Now, when this was reflected back to the leaders in Miami, they were shocked. They were shocked that that basically the leadership team were viewed as dictatorial. There's another picture that we shared with the leaders back in headquarters that reflected the feeling that a lot of the BBC Worldwide staff outside of HQ felt isolated, and alone, and that HQ was very much siloed and operating as in an elite fashion. So, a picture tells 1,000 words, and these pictures were presented back as one way of really amplifying the disturbance in the system. Any questions?
Michelle, we had a few questions crop up on the map that you showed. Okay. I think you've addressed some of them, but I had a question which was about the budget that you had for this project, just to get a sense of the money that BBC had to invest to go through this change programme. Then we had another question from Rosanna, who's joined us, and she sort of said this map's quite large to take in. Can you comment a bit more on the main points? But I think you may have covered that. Okay.
In terms of the budget, let me just go one by one, Rebecca, and then I know you said there's another one. In terms of the budget, it wasn't huge. We did everything in-house, so we did not bring in external consultants to run the focus groups. Basically, I trained up the leaders in how to do a good focus group, and they did it on their time. Of course, the budget was then, the 2 hours that were spent away from work on the focus groups and not on work. The learning map, there was a cost associated. To be honest, I can't remember exactly. It wasn't huge, small budget, again, because everything was done internally, because we believed that masterful change meant that the leaders needed to do the work, not external consultants, not, not extra pairs of hands that were brought in from the outside. So that's the budget question. In terms of the map, I think the main point about the map is it's a visual depiction of the change story, and each leader had a set of questions and exercises in a little toolkit that he or she could use to customize a 2-hour workshop with the team. But basically the goal of the learning map was to get everyone on the same page. So there wasn't any right or wrong answer. There were just a number of questions that the leaders posed to open up dialogue and get the team talking about the change, and basically with the end goal of getting everyone to say, okay, we understand where we've come from, we understand where we're going, we understand what needs to change, we get it, we buy in, what do we need to do now? So Rosanna, I hope that answered that question.
Great. Then we had one from Magda Michelle, but I think one of your slides may have answered this. So this was a slide where you had what the BBC used to look like, what it looks like now, and what it looks like, what you want it to look like in the future. Magda was asking a question around what the need for change was, why and from where to where.
Yeah, okay, really quickly. And by the way, I'm now looking back at Rosanna's question. She was asking about the number on the map of the £1 billion budget. That was 2020. That was our projected revenue to get to by 2020. That was not the budget for the project, just to be clear. We didn't spend billions on the project. So where we were coming from was a place where the UK headquarters was driving all of the brand work and all of the commercial deals. So basically in the UK headquarters in London, we would say to North America, to Latin America, to Asia, go sell Top Gear, go sell Dancing with the Stars, go sell this format of Sherlock. And what we found out is that the people in the geographies in the field were coming back and saying, yeah, but China doesn't want Top Gear with Jeremy in it. They want their own guys in it. And we were saying, no, we can't change formats. Must stay true to branding, and editorial standards, and must make China comply. And so the basic idea around the change was to shift the power, shift it from outside of the UK out to the regions. The regions sat with their audiences. They knew what their audiences wanted to buy or not to buy. So it was a real shift in power. But with that came a whole lot of shifting of heads, and as you can imagine, shifting of headcount and changing of processes. And also with it came the need to refresh the values, because the values were very UK, London-centric, and they didn't always translate out into Asia or Australia or Latin America or North America. Does that make sense? Okay, I'm going to keep going forward so we can hit all of the capabilities. So providing structure, making sure that the anxiety that's going to be happening during times of change is bearable. Helping people through the turbulence, making sure that as we go through the change, that people feel affirmed and encouraged, that it's safe to say risky things. It's safe to say, wow, I'm not sure this is going so well. Wow, I'm scared, I'm nervous. Making sure that people can have what we call the hard-to-have conversations. Making sure that people felt that there was empathy around their stress and anxiety, that it wasn't dismissed, and making sure that we were having high-quality dialogue, or as we called it, courageous conversations. So I'm sure we're all familiar with the concept of fight or flight, but according to some research that was done at the University of California in Los Angeles, there are 2 other ways that people can react to stress, 2 other behavioral patterns, and we tend to find them in females. And those two other behavioral patterns are called tend and befriend. So there's a tendency for females when they're going through stress to want to talk about them, to talk about the stresses, to tend to people, to have cups of coffee. Now, I'm not suggesting that within the corporate world we should offer free hugs, but I do believe that women have this ability during times of change to, make it okay to talk about our feelings, and especially when we're feeling stressed and scared. So what did we do at the BBC Worldwide? We had a number of different tools that we used. We used Salesforce Chatter to set up online discussions. We made sure that our senior leadership team went around and talked to people, not just our CEO, although we did also have our CEO doing blogs and also videos. We made sure that every day there was some kind of an update from Deborah Rowland, who was my boss, who was the head of people and OD. And we set up a brand and a marketing opportunity for people to go to an intranet to ask questions that were always answered, and answered as honestly and directly as we could without, making, leaking things out that could possibly get us into legal trouble. So those, these are examples of tools and processes that I think a lot of us probably would use in our organizations as we're going through change. So it's not rocket science, but I think it's good practice to share that we not only called upon our CEO, but we really said to our senior leaders, you need to get out there and have FaceTime, and then we really made it okay for everyone to be chatting about the change via Chatter. So the last capability is called creating time and space for transforming encounters. So what this is about is seeing every encounter, every conversation you have with a member of your staff, every email that you get from a staff member asking a question, every time you bump into someone in the hall and talk about the change as an opportunity to be a change leader and to really get people to change their paradigms. And one of the things that I think that women have in terms of a strength is this thing called women's intuition. And I do believe that sometimes we're able to intuit what's going on with a person and what they need in that moment to help transform them from being negative about a change to being possibly positive about that change, or at least to get them to a place where they're neutral about the change. I think women are good coaches by nature. I think they tend to ask questions more frequently instead of telling and directing. And I think during times of change, women have this ability to engage as opposed to try to influence people. And I think they also have a tendency to be asking their staff for their perspective. How are they feeling? How are they seeing it? How are they viewing it? And I think it's a really great strength that women have. And I see, and I saw the women at the BBC Worldwide doing a really good job at transforming what I call headspace. So how people were thinking about the change. Being able to challenge assumptions gently and cajoling people to see the change from a different perspective. And by doing that, really creating movement, getting people to move forward instead of staying stuck in a place of maybe fear or let's wait and see. So one of the things we did at the BBC Worldwide in order to provide that space for transforming encounters is we set up Just Talk sessions. What were Just Talk sessions? Well, they do what they say on the tin. They're opportunities for people to come and just talk. Now, what we wanted to do is show staff that we wanted to hear them and that we wanted to hear exactly where they were at. So we really said that there were no notes being taken, no cameras, no, this is a really safe space for them to come. When they came into the room, instead of there being chairs sitting facing forward in front of a lectern or in front of a stage or in front of a screen, the chairs were set up in small circles or pods of 6 to 8 chairs. And so we literally were transforming the space, the physical space also, not just the mental space. So we wanted to show staff that we were listening to them. We wanted to sense, intuit, what issues needed to be addressed. So what was going on in the room that needed to maybe be taken out of the room and addressed. We wanted to make sure that we could just channel that anxiety, allow there to be a pressure valve, a release valve, so that people could let go of that anxiety, and in the letting go of the anxiety, create positive energy. We wanted to show that the executive team was there operating as a team, and so the members of the executive team, there were always 3, 4, 5 members in the room sitting at one of the pods. And we also wanted to encourage our leadership group, which is 130 leaders at the next level down, to be there, to be sitting in the pods, and to be a part of the conversation, not observing, but actually sharing, especially when they were feeling anxious, nervous themselves. So really showing vulnerability, modeling that vulnerability. So I'm going to stop for a minute and just see if there are any questions about the last 2 capabilities, which is making the anxiety bearable and creating space to have transforming encounters.
Michelle, I'm quite interested to find out who hosted those Just Talk sessions so that people really felt comfortable in coming in and telling it as it is, because, obviously if you turn up to one of those sessions and your direct line manager is sat there, how did you overcome that type of issue?
Well, we didn't. We wanted that to happen. We wanted to be completely non-hierarchical, so that in any pod you could have your manager sitting next to you. If you felt uncomfortable with that, you could go sit at another pod. If your senior executive leader was there, we wanted you to be sitting next to him. The idea was to get rid of hierarchy and have the executive leader sitting next to the PA, sitting next to the individual contributor, sitting next to the manager, and having them all be basically on the same level, i.e. being human. They were hosted by the internal communications team. So they were, dubbed communication events, not by HR, although sometimes HR was there. But again, we were just sat there in the pod as an employee, not as an HR person.
Okay, there's a couple of more questions that have come in too.
Someone has asked a question about, women feeling distress and anxiety in others, and was there a specific role for women in the change at the BBC? We didn't carve out a specific role for them. My observations were that the female leaders handled the change differently than their male counterparts. They provided many more opportunities for people to speak the truth and to release the anxiety. They allowed people to cry and, gnash their teeth and get angry and, show emotion, whereas the men didn't dissuade that. They just didn't encourage it. And so the teams that reported up to the female leaders, and again, this is just anecdotal from my observations, but those teams were moving through the change and did move through the change at speed, at a better pace. Any other questions? I see there's a question about were the leaders challenged in providing answers to anxiety on cost and HC headcount cuts, and how did they manage that? They were challenged. They were asked. Let me just go on to the next two slides, and I'll share a little bit about how questions about headcount and cost reductions were handled in particular. So, one last thing I just wanted to share is at the end of every Just Talk session, we would ask people to stand up on a continuum of I know, I understand, I believe, I can, and I will. And again, this allowed people to be really honest about saying, you know, I know that this change is good. I get it intellectually, but I still don't believe that it's a good thing to do. Or for other people to say, look, I know it, I understand it, I get it, I just don't know what I can do about it. And for some people to say, I know it, I get it, I understand it, I believe in my gut it's the right thing to do, I feel like I have the tools to be able to contribute, and I'm actually going to go out there tomorrow and I will help drive the change. So one really interesting little exercise that we did at the end of every Just Talk session to sense where people were in the transformation. So I talked about masterful change and the idea that we really trust our people to be able to find the solutions. And so a masterful change approach involves lots of communications, lots and lots and lots, high-level sponsorship from not just the top senior leadership team, but engagement from the wider leadership team. And that was about 130 people who were reports to the senior leadership group or reports to the reports. So L2, 2 levels down. And they were told that they were responsible for the engaging of their teams so that people weren't just dependent on the CEO and the 12 board members. A lot of time and effort was invested in change capability building. Every L2 went through a program called Change in Me. And every senior leader went through a program called Masterful Change, which was a 2-day change capability program. And finally, attention to all aspects of the way we work, not just, you know, the organization design, headcount, structural piece, but also how we were going to change the culture, how we were going to change the governance, how we were going to change the incentives to drive the new behaviors. And one of the things we did is put a structure in place. And we put a team in place called the BRIT, the Balanced Regionalization Implementation Team. And that was a team of volunteers who were seconded to go and work on this change 2 days out of 5. And that was the team that really handled the questions about headcount and costs. And what they did is they liaised with each of their divisions, and they did the hard work to take all of the data that had been gathered around how we needed to shift heads and how we needed to reduce costs, and made the proposal up to the executive team. So the leaders were all responsible for answering questions about headcount, and how they did that was through the BRIT team, which would periodically go around and do road shows to share the approach they were taking, the methodology they were using, and the data that they were cutting and analyzing, and being really transparent so that the leaders didn't have to kind of bear the burden of being, you know, the ones with the answer. We could also call upon this BRIT team to share. The last thing I just wanted to share is that we set up these people and organization teams around these boxes. So I mentioned these boxes earlier, this framework. So each executive member was on at least one, if not 2, of these teams. So there were 2 executives who were leading the specific piece of work around organizational structure with support from the BRIT team. There were 2 executives who looked at a number of new processes that needed to be put in place. I helped support the culture team along with Dan, who was our head of digital. He was the senior leader sponsor. And it was really Dan's role to put a team together, and I supported him behind the scenes for how we would go out and look at the culture, how we would refresh the values, how we would look at what we called the rules of the game, or how people should be expected to behave with one another. And so why I think this change was able to be landed so successfully was it was driven by the people who knew best what needed to happen. So I'll stop. I know we're almost out of time. Take any last questions before I summarize what I think were the keys to this successful change being implemented. By the way, on April 1st, which I thought was always a bit interesting, why we picked that date. Anyway, any questions? So someone's asking for a final look at the map. We can go back to that in a minute. Anything else?
Michelle, just to let everybody on the call know, we have recorded the call today, and so we will be uploading the recording to YouTube, and we'll also make your slides available via our website.
Okay, great. So then someone can take a look at the map.
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. There's a question here about how the people on the Brit team were selected. They actually were our high potentials. They were asked, but then they decided whether they wanted to volunteer. So the first screening was, who did we have in our high potential talent pool? Because we really saw this as a developmental opportunity for them to learn some really wonderful change skills. We then approached them. We told them what the remit was. We told them what it would be like. And we had them think about it because it was a pretty big commitment, as we've mentioned. They were seconded for 2 out of 5 days a week for a good 4 months. And then the bottom line was they decided. So in summary, I believe that change is here to stay. I believe that it can be a real source of happiness at work if we can only learn how to do it masterfully. I think there are a lot of things that we as female leaders bring to the table, a lot of strengths that help us really be great change agents. And I'd like you to walk away with a memory of these 4 key change behaviors. And to take those back into your organization. How do you create more time and space so that people can transform their mindset and transform their behaviors? How can we make sure that we're managing the anxiety and making sure that it's bearable for people and channeling the energy in a positive way? How can we make sure that we tell it like it is when we need to and not be afraid? And finally, how can we create energy by really telling great, compelling stories about why change is needed? And so I'd like to leave you with one last picture. And let's just click here. I think that we can all be change chameleons within our organizations, doing some of this overtly and doing some of this via stealth behind the scenes. So I hope that was helpful. I hope that gave you some insights into how we did it at the BBC Worldwide. Obviously, I can take a few more questions, and if anyone has a question they want to ask me offline, I'll make sure that my email address is in the PowerPoint, which will be shared with all of the attendees and delegates. So thanks, everyone, for your time and attention. Rebecca, were there any last questions?
No, that's it. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you very much for your time again. We know that you're always so willing to give to PWN Global, so we're really grateful for that. Just to let people on the call know that we are running a series of these very practical how-to workshops similar to the one that Michelle has presented today, and the next one we have is in January, and it's called Mastery of the Mind. So anybody who wants to learn a little bit more about mindfulness can come along to that one, and you will find that on the PWN calendar. And then also Michelle has kindly offered to do another really interesting session for us in February on political savvy in the workplace. So be sure to look out for our global mailers our global event mailers that tell you what events and webinars are coming up. So thanks again, Michelle. It's been really, really interesting, and thanks to everybody for joining.
Thank you. Go forth.